On Tuesday, March 2nd, 1865, some estimate 10,000 freed slaves gathered on the Citadel Green in Charleston. An impromptu parade began there. It marched down through the city to the Battery and back up again. During this parade, the freed slaves carried signs celebrating their freedom. They chanted slogans that demonstrated their joy and their frustration over years of slavery. They took a coffin and they put it on a cart, and on either side of that coffin they painted the word slavery. This impromptu parade became a funeral. They were putting slavery to death, and for the first time in many years there was hope. In just a few short years, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment would be passed. The 13th Amendment gave them their freedom. The 14th Amendment made them citizens, and the 15th Amendment gave the freed black males the right to vote. The hope for freedom and equality in a new society was there, but unfortunately it would not last long. As one historian has stated, it did not get better after the war, it got worse. After the war, many of the white leadership in the South were looking to reestablish their order as quickly as possible. On the day that the war ended, 2/3 of the capital wealth of South Carolina was lost. The entire system was dependent upon slave labor. And rather than being humbled by the loss of the war, many became more resilient to keep the former slaves, quote, in their place. As one minister stated in 1871, "We have nothing to repent of and nothing to apologize for." The freedom that the former slaves had hoped for would not soon be realized. As author Douglas Blackman has stated, slavery would just simply take on another name. The clearest example of this is evident in the way that even the 13th Amendment was bypassed. The 13th Amendment, while establishing freedom, also had an exception clause. It reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." This exception clause would be exploited into what would be known as the Convict Lease system, a corrupt system to replace the workforce in the South. Here's how it would work. At that time in South Carolina, there was no central penitentiary system. Everything was run through local jails. In these jails, oftentimes the local sheriff would also act as the judge. A farmer would come to the sheriff and tell him how many men he needs for his work. The sheriff would go out and arrest able men on various and sundry charges. For example, charges like vagrancy. Vagrancy is the offense of a person not being able to prove at any given moment that he or she was employed. The farmer would come back, pay the sheriff, and then take them to work, which could even be out of state. Many times these men would be convicted and leased out before their family even knew there was a problem. Most blacks lived in fear of this system, not knowing when it would happen to them or someone they loved. The convict lease system did not end until the 1940s. Through racist leaders like Ben Tillman, the governor of South Carolina, the leadership of the state was able to establish a social order that represented their supremacist views. A new constitution was written in South Carolina in 1895 that basically undermined all the amendments that were previously ratified. The convict lease system was in place, undermining the 13th Amendment, which gave them freedom. The new Constitution established what would be known as Jim Crow's laws, which forced segregation and relegated blacks to second-class citizens, undermining the 14th Amendment. Poll taxes and literacy tests were passed for voting, which unjustly excluded over 80% of the black population from the right to vote, undermining the 15th Amendment. As the new century was approaching, the racist systems and structures were all in place. Chattel slavery had ended with the war, but unfortunately, blacks did not live in hope, but they lived in fear, except in the church. In the church, the African American experience was one of freedom, one of hope, one of refuge. The African American church grew significantly during this time. In Baptist circles alone, there were more African American churches than all the other churches combined. The perseverance and faithfulness of these brothers and sisters, especially in the face of such injustice in society, is one that we can all learn from and emulate.